Actually, just to go back to the question, my question is about the transportation and packaging of food in that half of the pie for food. So you just said that is the half the pie for food was mostly from the producing of the food, the packaging and transportation of that food from South America or from China or from Europe to here is relatively small compared to the actual production. And then we still have like about a quarter of the pie was for transportation. So would that be including all the trips that we make to our local farmers market rather than driving to big boxes? That type of transportation cost associated with food is accounted for? So then my question number one. Question number two is as an education thing for myself. I understand the big difference between meat and like grain and vegetable on production, but I didn't understand there's a bit different between vegetarian diet versus vegan diet. So maybe you can explain a little bit of the difference or the significance versus from meat to vegetarian and from vegetarian to vegan.
Sure. I'll do the second one. You can do the first one. So vegetarian diet, well, there are different types of vegetarian diets, but it generally is fruit, vegetables, grains, and dairy products and eggs. But a vegan diet doesn't have dairy products or eggs. And some of them don't even have, some of them take it to not even eating honey and like other things produced by animals. So that's the difference. So it's mainly the dairy that's the big... Between being a vegetarian and a vegan? Yeah, it would. I mean, yeah, it would, because dairy is included in a vegetarian diet. And that's that's one of the higher footprint food types. And then do you want to do the transportation one? I think you have to use the microphone.
So your question was whether transportation to the store to get food is included in the food. It's actually included in the transportation pie. So for food, we've just done life cycle of individual types of food, basically. Yes, wherever possible, that would be included. Yeah, in the food portion. But your trip to the store, that's in the transportation pie.
Okay.
Yeah.
There it is. Hi. I had a question in the context of the surveys that have been done in the knowledge of a fairly complicated concept. Mm-hmm. And when you've identified that only 7% of people can actually really get it close, I think there's a lot of work to be done in terms of communications and social marketing on first understanding what we're talking about and understanding it from a very lay perspective. I mean, I think all of us are in the room when we work in sustainability issues. We have our ideas, but we have a long way to go so that we really know what we're talking about, and then the very real practical things that we might want to target in terms of social marketing, where people can make significant changes, understanding what those changes are and the impact of those changes, and feel good about the choices. I mean, I come back to this with the example of recycling, where everybody's so proud, and that's the first thing that they mention. And then you want to say, yeah, that's great. And then you want to say, what about that car? What about that one? You know, there's all the other pieces that go into the ecological footprint, including density, living, all of the things that we're talking about, but that people don't associate with their own environmental footprint. So I see that as an interesting challenge ahead, and I think it will take many years to kind of get to the point where we not only understand it, but we can address our own individual behaviors without feeling, moving it to the next stage of really reducing this.
Last one we have.
I was just wondering whether there's a better, more appropriate kind of municipal measure than that environmental footprint measure. Some things, I just think, food, of all the things that we impact the environment, in my mind, food is relatively small, but maybe I'm off. But have we thought of other measurements other than just that 2 hectare or 5 hectare footprint?
Well, yeah, I mean, we have all the rest of the Greenest City targets to measure all those other things. And this one is in there, I think, because it's about personal choice. It's about consumption. It includes some equity issues. And it's kind of an absolute, right? Like, this is how much productive land capacity there is, and this is how much we're exceeding it. And it also gives us the space and the license to talk about, around all the communications and education and constituency building piece of it. And it kind of, it unites all the rest in a way that's really nice too. Like, so we're not just looking at pieces, we're not just looking at buildings and transportation and food as separate pieces, but it relates them. So I think that that's a pretty useful thing too. The jobs, the green economy and the job creation does that as well. From my point of view, I think it's really important to have those so that the integration between the different issues is happening. Otherwise,
It seems like 50% for food somehow seems out of whack to me as far as our footprint.
Please don't take that. These are very, very rough and preliminary. We're actually getting some detailed work done, and then we'll be able to move forward with a numbers basis. We really can't go. That's just, food is likely going to be the largest factor, though. Don't go with a 50% number. That's just for illustration purposes. And just to follow up, in terms of talking about what our impact on the planet is, what the footprint does, it talks about all the globally available bioproductive resources. So that's what the real measure is, and all the things we do have to be measured. And globally, we're actually eating into stocks. So we're overexploiting fish, overexploiting. So that's kind of why I would say it is also important to look at it that way. But certainly, it's a big challenge to use that metric.
The other thing about it that's important that it took me a while to come around to is that it's about renewable resources. So things like fossil fuels aren't, like the emissions are included in that, but fossil fuel production is not an annually renewable resource. So that's not really in there. So that's why it looks like that. Yeah.
You don't want to know that.
It's up to Amanda, not me. You're all still sitting here.
And Paul said so much of it. I think Paul was saying so much of it is out of the city's realm, as you mentioned too. So another approach could be to attack it at two levels. One, the big picture, full sharing the earth piece, but then also drill down on the things that are more within the city's realm and what proportion they represent of the total, and therefore how much we need to, through our policies and things, reduce those impacts, which is kind of what we were doing on the water side. We had to assume, okay, we're a much simpler kind of concept, but we're a certain proportion of the regional consumption. And we have control over how much we're using for that proportion. We're going to set the targets for that proportion and address those. And frankly, we have to rely on the other municipalities to be shamed into doing the same thing. But similarly here, we probably can't realistically say that the city is going to convince everybody to reduce their materialism by 60% or something like that, which is a lot of what that one's about.
Yeah.
But there are things within that are very much city factors.
Yeah.
That we can't have policies around.
Yeah, and catalyze actions by other organizations around them too, right? Like food waste is a great example. If we can get rid of food waste from our system and that's composted, but also waste that's produced before it's ever consumed from retail, like we can talk about that kind of food waste, right? And that kind of reduction in consumption because it's purely waste. So there are things that we can do, but it really does challenge us to figure out what those are, because there's a lot that's probably off limits in terms of what we want to directly tackle. But yeah, that's a good comment. Thank you all very much for coming. Enjoy the rest of your day.